Hi, I'm Ronnie Bringle, and I love to paint, don't you? I especially love painting these Santas. It's so much fun to watch them come to life and develop their own little personalities as you paint through the stages. You know, it's never too early to start thinking about Christmas. So I'd like to take you on a journey, and we'll paint this little Santa. You can watch him come to life right on your board. Some of the stages aren't very pretty, so I hope you're prepared, and let's paint. I'm excited to show you my Santa painting techniques. So let's take a little bit closer look at him. He's a jolly looking guy, so I think we'll get started right away. Okay, I've got my pattern traced on, and you'll notice I traced on all of the detail on the face. I like to have that there because it kind of helps my imagination. It helps me kind of start building his features in my brain before I can get them onto the board. So I like to trace those on, and then even though I have to probably trace them on again later, they're there for me to use to start. I'm going to be using the Golden Open paint. You can use the Josonia paint if you like. The technique is the same whether you use the Golden Open or the Josonia. Sometimes the Golden Open stays wet a little bit longer, so it means you have to use a hairdryer more frequently, or maybe you have to move around on the painting and give it a little bit of dry time. But basically the techniques are the same. The colors are a little bit different, and you'll notice in your pattern packet you have a sheet of Golden Open information. It kind of just tells you a little bit about the differences in the paint and how I like to use it the same. And then on the back side a little more information, and it gives you the color conversions. So if you are going to use the Josonia, you can just convert the color right there, or if you want to use the Golden Open, those colors are listed in the very first page of your instruction sheet. Okay, so here we go. We are going to zoom in on his face so we can really see the detail. I'm going to start by defining a little bit of that detail with my liner brush. I'm going to be using a mix that I call Flesh Tone, and if you're using Josonia, you'll just use the skin tone base. Flesh Tone is just titanium white with a little bit of raw sienna and a little bit of cad red light. And those instructions are in your in your pattern packet. I'm not going to be giving you technique instructions in this series. If you have forgotten some of the techniques, I'll put the address at the end of the video where you can go back to the Terms and Techniques videos and brush up on your stippling and dry rubbing and those things that we talked about before, and that'll help you to remember what I'm doing. But I'm not going to be doing technique instruction for this video. So with my liner brush now and my skin tone, flesh tone, and a little bit of water, I'm going to start defining some of these areas. So first of all, let's talk about the eyelids. Right up in here, in this fleshy, more puffy part of the eyelid, I'm going to go ahead and dry brush. And as I approach the nose, I'm going to just lighten up so that I don't put quite as much in there next to the nose. Kind of go heavy where it's more fleshy, and then lighter with a lighter touch as you get to the nose. On this eye, we want to do heavier paint right above the eye in the fleshy part of the lid. Dry brush out to the corner, and then you're going to just kind of dry brush in right along that one pattern line. There are two lines here. This line is the lid line, and then he has a fold in the corner of his eye. You can't see it on this eye because it's hidden behind the nose and because of the angle of his face. So now I'm going to add a little more paint to my brush, and I want to create this inner fold line, and then I just want to kind of dab and dry brush towards that upper lid, but I want to leave just a little bit of definition right in there that's going to be the shaded area. So I'm not going to fill that in completely. I want to make sure I get that line in there, but then I don't necessarily want to go all the way up into that lid. Below the eyes, I want to create up that puffy flesh that's kind of below the eye, and which the lower lid is encased in there. So that's just a dry brush. We want to make sure that we're mostly going straight across the bottom part of the eye. You don't want to curve it downward too much, maybe a tiny little bit, but not very much, because that'll make him look sad. So we're just dry brushing fleshy color right in there under his eye, just so that we're going to, we'll have a little bit of the detail in there. Alright, now I'm going to define his nose. This line will disappear as we paint along, but in order to maintain the look of his face as we go, I don't want to lose this line too soon. So I'm going to go ahead and paint this line just the way it is from the pattern, up around the nostril, and then I'm just going to kind of dry brush that in, and I'm not going to do too much with it. I'm just going to let it be there, and I'll deal with it as we go along. I'm going to do the same thing on the flange. I want to make sure that I keep the shape of that flange, so I'm going to just paint the line in, and then I'm going to go ahead and fill in all that part of the flange. Looks a little weird right now, but he'll come. Okay, on the lips, on the lower lip, I'm going to fill the entire lip with my flesh tone. I always paint the lip just a little bit further into the mustache than what I'm going to end up with, because I want to have the freedom to paint that mustache kind of loose and hairy. I don't want to have to make it too blocky. So I don't want to have any paint here or here that has a hard line that I'm going to have to try to cover up. Okay, I think for this Santa, those are all the places where you'll use your liner brush. Then we'll switch to the round Bringle blender, and we're going to do some dry stippling. I'm using a number 4 for mine, and that's probably about what you want to use. I'm going to load for a dry stipple, blot it out of my brush. Again, check the end of the video for the web address where you can look at the technique videos in case you've forgotten how to do them. I want to stipple the round fatness of his cheek. Not necessarily the highlight, because we're not even close to a highlight yet, but I want to create a roundness. I don't want to look at my photo and say that I'm, creating just that lightest area, because this is not just the lightest area. And then I'm going to dry rub to kind of blend that outward, like so. And stipple again on the opposite cheek. If you have too much paint on your brush, be sure and blot it. You want to be able to control what your brush is doing. And then I'm going to dry brush to blend that out. Now I want to be careful along this edge of the face, and I'm just going to kind of dry rub to pull that paint out there to the edge. But I don't want to go beyond the edge. That's the edge of his face, so you don't want to pull his flesh color onto the background right in there. And more stippling on the nose. Now I want to stipple the lightest area right up in here, not down at the bottom of the nose in here, but upwards a little bit, because down in here we'll just do a little dry rub. We want to have that part of the nose be a little bit darker where it turns back towards the face. Now I want to dry brush on the bridge of the nose, and I want to take that up into the forehead somewhat so that I'll make sure that forehead gets blended. For the upper lip, I'm just going to stipple and kind of just gently stipple that up towards the nose. And it's going to look really strange right now, but it'll be okay in the end. Now on the chin, there's no real place to stop or start on the chin. We just want a blur of color in there. So I'm just going to drop down a little ways from the lip and start stippling a nice area right in here. Kind of big. And then I'm going to dry rub to blend that off. The main thing is, on the chin you don't want to have any hard line any place. It just wants to blend away into the beard. Let's get a little bit better look at that, a little bit better perspective on it. Okay. So now we have a couple of little detail areas to do with the round blender. We want to create the smile line. A lot of times we call this a smile line. It's actually called a nasolabial fold. And we want to make sure that we get some bright paint right along the edge of the fold so that we'll have that crease once we're finished. Now, if this doesn't blend in just fine, that's okay. It will eventually. But we want to just kind of dry brush right along that line, that pattern line, and then just kind of dry rub it out into the cheek. Now on the forehead we want to create some wrinkles. So we don't want to create these hard straight lines going all the way across the forehead. So I'm going to kind of dance on the tip of my round blender. And I'm just going to create kind of a jiggly line like this and do just a few. Now this is the puffy flesh between the creases. So we want to have them very close together, almost overlapping. Okay, that's pretty good. Alright, let's go backwards just one time here. And with your liner brush, and we could have done this right in the beginning, but my memory isn't what it used to be. So we're going to put in some creases here at the eyelids. This is, again, the puffy flesh that is between the creases. So you want these to be close together. Okay, it looks a little strange right now. We want to do some of that on the other side as well. Just a little bit. This doesn't really show up much once you're finished over here on this side. But we want to get a little bit of wrinkles in there. Okay, so now we've got some detail in there. We've got some stippling done. I'm going to go ahead and put the hair dryer to this and make sure it's nice and dry before I start doing my second coat. Okay, I'm nice and dry to the touch now, so I can get my second coat on. And let's zoom in just a little bit so you can see that detail. Again, with my liner brush, I'm going to create and work on those areas where they're actually a little bit too small to use my round blender. So under the eye, we're going to start building a little bit lighter, brighter flesh. The eyelids, but not totally. We want to make sure that the paint kind of dry brush that in towards the nose so it disappears without a hard line there. Then we've got that little fold on the inside of this eye. And we want to make sure that we kind of try to maintain the shape so that we don't lose that, but leaving just little sliver of dark there, so that we'll use that as shading. I'm going to reestablish the wrinkles, not reestablish, but reinforce these, make them a little bit brighter. And these will work on as we go along. Remember though, you don't want to leave big gaps between the puffy part of the wrinkle, because those are just the dark creases between the wrinkles. On the forehead, maybe I'll use my liner brush this time and just pull some of those wrinkles across. I want to get a second layer on the lip. And you'll notice when I'm working on this lip, I'm leaving just the slightest little suggestion of a line. It isn't really even an opening there. It's just that I don't really paint right over that line. I just leave that as a separation between the lower lip and the upper lip, so that I'll know where I am when it comes time to work on those lips. So you can just see that tiny little suggestion of a line right there, but you don't want to leave too much. Now we shouldn't have to use the liner brush again on the nose, but you certainly could. If you lost your nose or you're afraid you're going to lose the shape of that, then go ahead and use your liner brush again to reestablish those pattern lines. That line will go away as we paint along. Alright, then we'll use our round blender again, and I'm going to stipple and dry rub the same places that I did before. I'm going to start in the same place, making sure that I'm building more of this light color in the light areas, and then dry rubbing in the darker areas, so that I'm not pulling that bright light value into the dark areas, but I'm keeping it more in those lightest areas. So if you can think of it that way, like stippling creates the light areas and dry rubbing creates the dark and medium dark areas. So if it's a place where you know that it's going to be shaded, that's a place where you would dry rub. If he's a place where he's going to be catching the light or be nice and fleshy and round and fat, then that's a place where you want to stipple. So some people that are pretty heavy-handed can get the stippling and dry rubbing process done in maybe 2 times. Some might take 4 or 5 times. I find that 3 is kind of my magic number. Usually I do the stippling and dry rubbing on the face about 3 times before I go on to the next step. On the nose here, I want to make sure that this part is brighter, but down here I'm going to dry rub. And then on the bridge of the nose, I'm going to dry brush up into the forehead. Alright, his nose is starting to appear now. On the chin, I'm going to stipple again on the chin. And then I'm going to dry rub to blend that up to the lip, out into the beard, just so that I have light flesh kind of in the middle, and then I'm going to have a darker flesh around the outer edges. We'll back off on that a little bit so you can see it better. Now once I have stippled the second time, and I pretty much have established the areas that I want to have light, then I'm going to go ahead and I'm going to dry rub. Now you want to make sure your surface is dry to the touch. And if it's not, you can wait, or you can go use the hairdryer on it to dry it off. I think I'm okay to go ahead and just do a nice dry rub. The idea here is that we want to have flesh on the entire face. In some areas it's going to have more flesh, causing it to be a lighter color. In some areas it has less flesh, causing it to be a darker value. So now I've dry rubbed the entire face. Remember that before you start that, the face has to be completely dry to the touch. Now to start my third layer, I also want to make sure that my face is very dry to the touch. So we're going to take another little break I'm going to take it to the hairdryer and put my third layer of color on. I'm dry now to the touch, and I'm ready for my third layer of color. I'm still working with my flesh tone, the same color, and I'm going to start with my round Bringle blender and stipple. Again, we want to do this on what you call the apple of the cheek. So where it's the roundest and fleshiest, that's where you want to stipple, and then you're going to dry rub outward. Now sometimes people tell me that it's easier to do all the stippling, let it dry, and then come back and do a dry rub, which makes perfect sense because then you know all your stippling is dry and you can just come back and dry rub over the whole face. So if you want to do it that way, that's perfectly okay. On the nose, all I'm doing is the same thing I did 2 times before. A little bit here on the flange, which we could have done with a liner brush, but I had my blender in my hand, so that's what I used. I want to get a third layer on the chin. Blend that out and around. His chin is getting pretty big there. Now on the forehead, I want to create a little bit more color along this edge here. So I'm going to just kind of rub some of that in and then dry rub it to blend it into the forehead. And the same over here. I want just a little bit more color here. I don't want it quite so blue. And then blend it into the forehead. And you've probably lost your eyebrows, but that's okay. We'll put those back. So now I'm doing a little bit of a dry rub everywhere. Remember, there's no dark blue on a face. All we want to do is use that blue as a shadow color. So anything that's blue needs to have some flesh over the top of it. And maybe you'll have more where you've applied a stronger application, and maybe you'll have less where you did your dry rubbing. But everything has to have some flesh on it. So just now to finish off this layer here, the third layer of color, I'm going to do this lower lip again. I'm going to add just a little bit more to the nose. I'm going to do the eyelids again. Everything that I did before, I want to increase the depth of that color. So that all the lids, doing exactly the same thing that I did before. There's one more thing to do with my liner, or excuse me, with my blender, and that is that upper lip. Again, I'm going to add just a little more color to the upper lip. Even though we do want to keep that a little bit darker, we still have to have a little bit more flesh on it. And I think that when I did the second layer of color on the face, I probably skipped over this. So you'll want to make sure you get about 3 layers of color on that upper lip as well. So let's back off and get a little better perspective of his face. Now, there are some areas that look a little bit harsh. You can try to smooth those out if you want to, or you can just leave them and they'll go away as we continue on. But that's all we have time for today. I hope that you got your little face this far. It needs to be dry now for the next layer, so if you were going to continue painting in one session, you would want to make sure you dry this with the hairdryer before you move on. And I hope you enjoy painting him, and I will see you next time.